Right. So under the 78 Constitution, we shall look at the public sector and what sort of a connection the president has with the public sector. Now, just recapping what we studied about the public sector under 47 and 72 constitutions. We saw under the 47 constitution, the public sector was too independent, a little too independent, right? So much so that the public sector was more powerful even than the cabinet. And we saw how that was a problem, and they had to address that in 72. And 72, they completely got rid of that independency and made the cabinet in charge of everything. That kind of wasn't the best either, because the ministers and everyone being able to handle all that. So if you remember, under the 1947 Constitution, right? Under the 1947 Constitution, you had something called the Public Service Commission. All right. Yeah, something called the Public Service Commission. Right, this was under 47. Under 72, what happened? This was broken into two. Public Service Advisory Board and Public Service Disciplinary Board. All right. This was under 72. What happened under 78? This was again reunited as what it was, Public Service Commission. That's the first thing you need to know. Under 47, we had Public Service Commission, Solitary Commission, which was broken into two in the 72, Public Service Advisory Board and Public Service Disciplinary Board, which was unified into one again, Public Service Commission. But keep in mind, although the structure was reversed to the 47, it did not receive the independence it had, right? Now this 1947 Public Service Commission was extremely powerful, right? It was more powerful than the cabinet itself. Okay, the 78 Public Service Commission did not have all that powers. Okay, it had more powers than, well, it had more powers than the 72 Advisory Board and the Disciplinary Board. But this never went back to the 47. So technically speaking, 47 Public Service Commission was so independent, 100% independent. Public Service Advisory Board and Disciplinary Board under 72 was 0% independent. Whereas Public Service Commission under 78 was like 50%, somewhere in between the previous two. It was not too independent, not neither less independent. Okay. So that's the first thing you need to know, right? Then what do you want to know next? What you should know next? Then you need to keep in mind that the president's powers, the powers of the president has been so significant that it completely shadows out the powers of this Public Service Commission, right? Now, first of all, this Public Service Commission is consisted of 5 members. They are appointed by the president, right? President appoints these 5 members. So until the 17th and 19th Amendment came along, according to the original constitution, the president had so much powers over the public sector, right? So much so, all the top positions in the public sector, were appointed by the president on his sole discretion, right? What are those big positions? What are the big positions of the government? What are the big positions in the permanent executive? Attorney General, Auditor General, Inspector General of Police, right? The Ombudsman, the Election Commissioner. All these big positions are appointed by President on his sole discretion until the 17th and 19th Amendments came along. So in the amendments, we learn how those powers were later changed. But you need to have the idea that the president's powers as the most powerful figure in this political system completely shadows out the entire public sector. So the permanent executive of the country is clearly controlled by the president. President has the rope in his hand, right? President has the remote control in his hand to control the permanent executive the way he wants. Okay, right. So let's read this and find out. Sarah, could you read?
Yeah. The president and the public sector. When we study the public sector of Sri Lanka in post-independence period, it is important to study the 1947 Salisbury Constitution as well as the 1972 First Republican Constitution. Under the 1947 Salisbury Constitution, the public sector of Ceylon was given complete independence from many political influences. The Public Service Commission, which was appointed by the Governor General, had the complete authority over all appointments, promotions, transfers, disciplinary actions, and terminations of the public sector. Under the 1972 First Republican Constitution, the independency of the public sector was completely removed and the authority over all appointments, promotions, transfers, disciplinary actions, and termination of the public sector were handed over to the Cabinet of Ministers, although there were two commissions as the Public Service Advisory Board and the Public Service Disciplinary Board. These commissions had no independence as the public sector was heavily politicized. Under the 1978 Constitution, the public sector was given some independence, although the public sector was continued as a politicized body. The 78th Constitution combined the commissions of the 72 Constitution to establish a solitary commission as the Public Service Commission. Therefore, it can be seen that the 78th Constitution has placed the public sector somewhere in between 47 and 72 constitutions in terms of independency. As provided by Article 55(1) in Chapter 9 of the Constitution, the powers in terms of all appointments, promotions, transfers, disciplinary actions, and terminations of the public sector are handled by the Cabinet of Ministers. This eventually means that the President, as the head of the Cabinet, has the highest authority over the public sector. Article 56(1) provides that the Public Service Commission only has powers to make decisions under the advice of the Cabinet. This means that the Commission has the power to act on specific appointments, promotion, transfer, disciplinary actions, and termination of the public sector. The Commission is consistent of 5 members appointed by the President, a member of the Parliament, a member of the Provincial Council, a member of a local government authority, a judicial officer, a public servant, shall not be eligible to be appointed to this commission. Also, if a position of a member becomes vacant due to a death or resignation found guilty by the court on charges of corruption, removed by the president shall appoint a new member for the remainder term. Also, the president has the power to grant leaves up to 2 months and appoint a member for that period as replacement. The official term of a member of this commission is 3 years, and their salaries are paid by the consolidated fund of the government. These salaries cannot be reduced. Also, it should be noted that the Commission has the power to appoint a sub-commission of 3 members, non-members of Public Service Commission, to handle certain actions in terms of appointments, promotion, transfers, disciplinary actions, and terminations of the lower layers of the public sector. Therefore, it can be seen that the Public Service Commission, which was established under the 1978 Constitution, is not powerful as the Public Service Commission of the 1941 Salisbury Constitution. The 1947 Commission had the power to make decisions directly in terms of appointments, promotion, transfers, disciplinary actions, and terminations of the public sector. However, the 78 Public Service Commission can only fulfill these tasks under the advice of the Cabinet of Ministers. However, it is important to note that under the 78 Constitution, the public sector had a better independence than under the 1972 Constitution. The Public Service Commission had above mentioned powers since the original formation of the Constitution in 1978 under the 17th Amendment to the Constitution, and especially the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. The Public Service Commission received somewhat of an improvement in terms of independence.
Right. So that's pretty much it what you need to know, because most of this will be cleared out when we study the amendments, right? When it comes to the public sector of the 78 Constitution, what you need to know is that they went back to that solitary Public Service Commission Okay. And it had some level of independency in between 47 and 72 constitutions. And the president pretty much has the power. President appoints all these members, right? And the specifics about, like, who can not be appointed as a member to this council and all those details. Another important part for this of this lesson, you guys will come across that when we study the amendments, 17th Amendment, 18th Amendment and 19th Amendment, what sort of things those amendments change. When we look into that, it'll add something to what you already know about the public sector under the 1978 Constitution. Okay, right. Then we should be moving on to the judiciary. Before that, do you guys have any questions? Do you guys have any questions? Anything to clarify? Right. If not, you guys can take 2 minutes and make a small short note of the president and the public sector. Make a small short note. I will give you guys 2 minutes. Now, when I say make short notes, make sure that the note is short. Don't make short notes longer than the actual note. Right. Now let's take a look at the judiciary of the 78 Constitution. Now, the judiciary lesson is going to be much longer than the previous 2 lessons we had on Salisbury and 72. Okay. We will take like a thorough look at what sort of a judiciary we have here. Just to recap, what we studied under 47 was that we had the Privy Council sitting on top above the Supreme Court, and we saw under 72 the Privy Council, the connection was cut off, and we simply went ahead with the Supreme Court of our country. That's number 2. And we also saw that there was a Judicial Service Commission under Salisbury, which was split into Judicial Service Advisory Board and Judicial Service Disciplinary Board under 72, and those matters, right? So let's take a look at how the judiciary functions under the 78 Constitution, right? What's happening with the 78 Constitution in terms of the judiciary specifically. Now, of course, from Article 105 onwards and in Chapter 15, the judicial structure of Sri Lanka is provided. You don't exactly need to remember these article numbers. They are just given for reference purposes. So what are the judicial courthouses do we have? What are the courthouses do we have? Now, on top, we have the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka. There's only one Supreme Court in the entire country of Sri Lanka, which is the highest courthouse. Right below the Supreme Court, we have the Court of Appeal, right? One Court of Appeal for the entire country of Sri Lanka. Then you have high courts, right? There are high courts in each judicial district in Sri Lanka. Other than that, every province, we have a provincial high court also. Okay, you don't need to go into that much of details. But these 2 are the upper courthouses. If you get an MCQ asking what are the upper courthouses in Sri Lanka, it's the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal. What is the difference between the higher courthouses, upper courthouses and lower courthouses? What's the difference? There are plenty of differences, but the easiest way to differentiate is the fact that how many do you have in your country? If you only have one for the entire country, that's a higher courthouse. Now, there's only one Supreme Court for the entire country of Sri Lanka. There's only one Court of Appeal for the entire country of Sri Lanka. Those are upper courthouses. Higher court, then you have like the lower courthouse, which is the High Court of Sri Lanka. You have one high court in each judicial district, okay, not administrative districts, judicial districts, and you have magistrate courts, district courts, and all those are known as primary courthouses. Okay. Also, there's another term that you need to be familiar with, the first instant courts. What is a first instant court? That means that where of course the note explains that, where a certain case could be filed and examined initially. Okay. Now imagine that you have, imagine that you need to get a divorce, or you need to get like, you need to get some of your land sorted, right? You don't go straight away to the Supreme Court and get a divorce, or you don't go straight to the Supreme Court to get your land sorted. You need to go to a first instance court for that. For that matter, you go to district court and file a divorce case, or you go to district court to file a land case. Those are the first instance courts. So if you don't get a decision that you are satisfied with, then you are allowed to go to these courthouses and appeal, saying, you know, I went to district court, this is what they said, we don't agree with that. That's an appeal. Okay, like that. So the first instant courthouses in Sri Lanka, basically the ones that are not like not included. The higher upper courts are not included when it comes to first instant courts. Okay, right. Then we have an act called the Judicator Act. The Judicator Act, number 2 of 1978, has listed out the first instant courthouse in Sri Lanka, the High Court. Right, the High Court is one of the first instance courthouses, then the district court, family court, magistrate court, right? And of course, there are other primary courthouses. These things are there. Okay. So I'll just give you like a basic idea of how these courthouses work, not necessarily political science, but for general knowledge, right? So when it comes to the civil matters like family cases, divorce cases, land cases, property cases, right? Those things, defamation cases, those things go under the district court. This is where you go, district court. You go there and you put a case, right? When it comes to criminal matters, those things are handled under the magistrate court, okay? But when it comes to heavier criminal matters, anything that would get you a fine above 1,500 rupees and a 2-year imprisonment, it goes directly to High Court, like murders, rape cases, robberies, and all those things. Okay. So those are the first instance courthouses. So you go to these courthouses to start the case proceedings. And if you are not happy with any of the decisions given to you, then only you go to these two and you can appeal and get a reversal. You can request for a reversal of the decision. Okay. So as I mentioned before, you have upper courthouses and lower courthouses. When you say upper courthouses, it includes the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal. Other courthouses are lower courthouses, right? Right. Then we need to sort of have an idea about the Supreme Court and the structure, the powers and tasks. Before that, let's have a basic idea of what the judiciary is, what I just explained, right? Let's have a basic idea of that. Can we have someone to read? Rashid, can you read?
Okay, sir. The judiciary under 1978 Constitution, Article 105 of Chapter 15 of the Constitution provided for the judiciary structure of Sri Lanka. According to Article 105(1), the Sri Lankan judiciary consisted of 1. The Supreme Court of Sri Lanka, 2. The Court of Appeal of Sri Lanka, 3. The High Courts of Sri Lanka, 4. Other courts of first instances, tribunal or similar institutions established by the parliamentary for time to time. First instances courts are the courthouses where the certain case could be filed and examined initially. First instant courts do not include the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal, as the constitutions provide the Parliament has complete authority to determine courts of first instance. According to Judiciary Act at the number 2 of 1978, the courts of first instance of Sri Lanka includes the High Court, the District Court, Family Court, Magistrate Court, Primary Court. So it's primary, right?
Yes, primary court.
Therefore, the courts in the court system of Sri Lanka can be categorized into two types. One, upper court houses, two, lower court houses. The upper court houses include the Supreme Court and the Appeal Court, while remaining courts houses are considered as lower court houses.
Okay, right. Thanks, Rashid. Now we need to have an idea about how the Supreme Court works. Okay. 1 second. Guys. Right. Now, taking a look at the Supreme Court. This is the most important institute in the court structure of Sri Lanka. Right. So first of all, Article 118 of the 16th chapter provides that the Supreme Court is the highest and the final superior court of record in the Republic of Sri Lanka. So no Privy Council or whatever, Supreme Court is the end of the road. Okay. They clarify that first. Then of course, 119.1 specifies that the Supreme Court is consisted of the Chief Justice. Chief Justice is the head, right? Agavinisuru, if you heard of the Sinhala term. Chief Justice and not less than 6 and not more than 10 other judges. So you should have a minimum of 6 judges and a maximum of 10 judges and the Supreme Justice, Chief Justice. And okay, so that means that at least it should have 7 judges in total or 11 judges in total, including the Chief Justice. Okay, right. The Supreme Court judges are appointed by the president. Here we go again, right? Appointed by the president. And this includes appointing the Chief Justice as well. Okay, so the president appoints all these judges and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court on his sole discretion. Until the 17th and 19th Amendment, president appointed whoever the president desired, right? Whoever president thought to be fit in his or her own opinion. And we had instances of Chief Justices being appointed like that in a controversial manner, given the fact that the president has the sole authority to appoint the Chief Justice that way. Okay. However, the Constitution provides that the Supreme Court may function even when the position of a judge is vacant. That means that you may not have all 11. You may have a Chief Justice and like not 10 other judges. Still, the Supreme Court may function. Supreme Court may function while one of the judges is vacant. Right? So until the 17th Amendment, the original Constitution provided that the president could appoint on sole discretion, not a problem. Okay, it was just the 17th and 19th Amendments that sort of made it compulsory for president to follow the recommendation of the Constitutional Council. If this is too confusing to you, just ignore that part, because we'll learn about the Constitutional Council and what these amendments meant at a later lesson. Just keep in mind, before these amendments came, president appointed whoever he or she wanted. Whereas after the 17th Amendment, president can't do that. He has to take someone's recommendation for that. Okay. What else? As provided by the Constitution, a judge is allowed to be in office until the age of 65. Okay. So before the judge retires that way, the president could be the president could remove these judges after an impeachment is passed in the parliament, right? An impeachment should be passed against these judges in the parliament, then the president may remove such judges. Okay. And in order to do that, you need an absolute majority. What does that mean? Not a majority of the members of the parliament who's present at that time. It's not like 100 people are here present today. If 51 people say yes, you can get through. No. You need an absolute majority. You need 113. Out of everyone in the parliament, you need a majority, 113. Okay. However, following the impeachment, the removal of the judge should be carried out by the president. Of course, president is the one who removes the judge once this thing is passed. Also, it should be noted that the Speaker of the Parliament should accept the impeachment motion provided that the motion includes. First, you have to have a complete description. You need to have a complete description of the allegations. Like you can't bring an impeachment just for fun. The impeachment has to be based on some accusations, right? The accusations have to be clearly mentioned. That's number one. Secondly, at least 1/3 of the members of the parliament, that means at least 75% of the people, 75 members of the parliament should have signed it. Then only the speaker would take it, and once the speaker takes it, it'll go in the agenda. You guys remember we studied about how president can be impeached last week. So it's a little similar. Speaker would take that, put that into the parliament agenda, and once you pass it with an absolute majority, that means 113 people voting in favor of the impeachment, the judge is removed from his position. Okay. About the salary of a Supreme Court judge should be decided by the parliament, right? The parliament may decide, and then the consolidated fund of the government, the consolidated fund, it should be paid by the consolidated fund. So the government can't mess with that salary because it's coming from the consolidated fund. And the salary cannot be reduced at any point. It can only be increased. Parliament can increase the salary, they can't reduce the salary. Okay. Also, the retired judges are not allowed to take part in the legal profession or any other profit-earning business, profit-earning profession without the written permission of the president. If you are a judge, if you have just retired, right, and if you want to go back to practicing law, or if you want to do some other profit-earning profession, then you have to take the written permission of the president. Other than that, you can't go back to study because you will get a good salary and all that, like a retirement salary and all that, right? So because it's going to be controversial, you are not allowed to go back unless the president has given you written permission. In terms of powers and tasks, the Supreme Court has a unique position as the highest courthouse in Sri Lanka. Right? According to Article 108 of the Constitution, provides for the powers and tasks to be exercised by the Supreme Court. Now, this is important. These are the tasks, powers and tasks that should be implemented, should be exercised by the Supreme Court. Okay, we will be looking into each and every one of these separately, and you guys need to have a clear understanding of how each and every one of these tasks function. Before that, we need to get the basic things about the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka sorted. Okay, right. Can we have someone else? Tarushi, can you read? Does your mic work? Anyone else? Tasha,
Yes, sir.
Oh, wait, Tarushi's here. Okay, cool. Go ahead.
My laptop got stuck. The Supreme Court, as provided by 118 in Chapter 151 of the Constitution, the Supreme Court is the highest.
No, Tarushi. Chapter 16. You don't know how to do numericals.
Not really, so I'm not good at it.
Okay, 16.
Okay. In Chapter 16 of the Constitution, the Supreme Court is the highest and the final superior court of record of the Republic of Sri Lanka. Article 119, Clause 1 provides that the Supreme Court is consisted of the Chief Justice and of not less than 6 and not more than 10 other judges. The Supreme Court judges are appointed by the President. This includes appointing the Chief Justice as well. However, the Constitution provides that the Supreme Court may function even when the position of a judge is vacant. Until the 17th Amendment, the original Constitution allowed the President to appoint Supreme Court judges and the Chief Justice on his sole discussion. The 17th Amendment and the 19th Amendment established the Constitutional Court to provide recommendations for the President's appointment. As provided by the Constitution, a judge is allowed to be in office until the age of 65. Before the completion of the term, the judges can be removed from their position by passing an impeachment in the parliament with an absolute majority, such an impeachment can be drafted on the grounds of corruption or incapacity. However, following impeachment, the removal of, so can you scroll down a little bit? Okay, thank you. Impeachment in the parliament with an absolute majority, such as impeachment, can be uh, drafted on the grounds of corruption and incapacity. However, following the impeachment, the removal of the judge should be carried out by the president. Also, it should be noted that the speaker of the parliament only should accept the impeachment motion provided that the motion includes: number one, having a complete description of the allegation included in the impeachment; number two, at least um, uh, not
One third, one third, one
one
third.
third of the one third of the members of the parliament having signed the impeachment. After accepting such an impeachment motion, the Speaker of the Parliament should submit the impeachment to a parliamentary committee. The relevant judge has the opportunity to appeal in front of this committee in order to provide his innocence if the Parliament committee finds the relevant judge to be guilty. The committee forwards its decision to the Speaker where the... So can you scroll down a little bit, please? Where the speaker calls for a parliamentary vote if an absolute majority of members, 113 votes in favor in the impeachment, the judge is removed from his position. The salary of a Supreme Court judge is decided by the parliament and paid by the consolidated fund of the government. This salary cannot be reduced at any point. Also, it should be noted that the retired judges are not allowed to take part in the legal profession or any other profit earning profession without the written permission of the president. In terms of power and task, the Supreme Court has a unique position as the highest court house in Sri Lanka. Article 108 of the Constitution provides for the powers and tasks to be exercised by the Supreme Court. A jurisdiction is, in respect of constitutional matters, judicial preview power; B, jurisdiction of examination fundamental right petitions; C, final appellate jurisdiction, final court for appeals. So can you scroll down a little bit, please? Okay. C, final appellate jurisdiction, final court for appeals; D, consultative jurisdiction, providing consultation and advising lower courthouses; E, jurisdiction in election petition, examine the legitimacy of elections; F, jurisdiction in respect of any breach of the privileges of the parliament; G, jurisdictions in respect of such other matters which Parliament may be law vest or ordain.
Right. Okay. Any questions up to that point? Any questions about the basics? No. Oh, cool, right? All right. So let's take a look at the tasks of the Supreme Court one by one. What's to be done? Right. So what is the first task the Supreme Court in Sri Lanka has? Jurisdiction in respect of constitutional matters. We are talking about the judicial preview power here. Now let me take you down a little journey down the memory lane of 47 and 72. Right? What happened in 1947 Constitution? There was judicial review power. Judicial review power means that the courts could reverse a decision made by the parliament, judicial review power. Now, after that, it was replaced with judicial preview power. That was in 1972. That means that, you know, whatever that should be, if you want to challenge, whatever that needs to be challenged, right, is challenged with before it is passed with the legislature, passed in the legislature. Okay, before that is passed in the legislature. That's how you have judicial preview power. Now in 72, they had a separate house for these judicial preview matters. Now under 1947 Salisbury Constitution, they said, okay, we have judicial review power. That means we need to let the parliament, we need to let the judiciary revise something that the parliament has already passed. Even something that is already passed also could be reviewed like that, not a problem, revised like that, fine. But in order to do that, they said you can go to the Supreme Court, you can even go to the British Privy Council, which is a party in Great Britain. Okay, right, that's one. Secondly, they said that in under 1972, okay, now we have judicial preview power. That means that you can stop something, but before it is approved in the legislature, right? So in order to do that in 72, they established a separate courthouse called the Constitutional Court. A separate courthouse called the Constitutional Court. Okay. Now, under 1978 Constitution, what they did was, J.R. Jayawardena, when he created the Constitution, he said, okay, I am going to go ahead with the judicial preview power, just like 72. Because judicial review power is not good for the reputation of the legislature, right? So I'm going to go ahead with the preview power. But he said, it's, you know what, it's pointless. It's pointless to have a separate courthouse just for these constitutional preview matters, because you get these preview matters like very rarely, right? Once in a while. So what's the point in sustaining a separate house just for this? So instead he said, why not these judicial preview matters also be handled by the Supreme Court itself? Okay, so therefore he got rid of this separate house for judicial preview matters, and he said judicial preview cases will also be handled by the Supreme Court itself, and we don't need another house called Constitutional Court or whatever just to handle these matters. Okay, so judicial preview power was handed over to Supreme Court. That means if any citizen, right, if any citizen wants to challenge a certain bill which is yet to be passed in the legislature, you may go to the Supreme Court. How did things work in 1972, right? When the executive makes a decision, okay, now follow me here. When the executive makes a decision, okay, they write that down as a drafted bill and they send that to the parliament, right? So the parliament would pass that, then only it becomes a law. So when the executive writes that and when they send that to the parliament includes that in the agenda, saying we will take this into consideration on this particular day. Okay. So in that agenda is published. The agenda is published in the Gazette of the government. Do you guys know what the Gazette is? The Gazette is like a newspaper of the government. Right, it's like an official notice board. It's like a newspaper published by the government. They publish all the government notices there, right? So the parliament publishes in the Gazette what sort of drafted bills they are going to take into consideration. So all of us have access to that. Now, of course, it's there online. You can get the government Gazette online. right? So anyone can go through that and they can see what bills that will be taken into consideration and what the parliament is about to pass. So they publish this in the Gazette like 2 weeks prior to taking it into consideration in the parliament. So people have 2 weeks of time to go through this, to go through the Gazette, find out what the parliament is about to pass, and then go to the courts and challenge this, saying this is against the constitution. So please use judicial preview power and stop this from being passed. So under 1972, that had to be done by going to the Constitutional Court. Under 78, the Constitutional Court was taken out. Instead, they didn't establish anything, they gave that power to the Supreme Court itself. Understand? So that's the first. Okay. So we'll cover one by one actually, right? Cover one by one and we'll go ahead like that. Right. Who would like to read the next one? Let's get someone. Patrick, would you like to read? Your mic is not audible, Patrick. I can't hear. I can see you were unmuted, but I couldn't hear what you were saying. Who do we have? Wait, Pranesh. Pranesh, what about you?
Okay, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Jurisdiction in respect to constitutional matters. Judicial preview power. The revision power of the judiciary refers to the judiciary getting involved in the lawmaking process in order to assure that the laws which are made by the executive as legislature are in accordance with the constitution. Which means that if a law, an act or a bill is not consistent with the constitution, the judiciary has the power to reverse the law. In general, there are two methods for this: judicial review power and judicial preview power. Under judicial preview power, the judiciary can reverse the law even after the approval of the legislature. However, under judicial preview power, the judiciary has to act before the approval of the legislature, which means at the bill stage. Under Salisbury Constitution 1947, judicial review power was allowed under the 1972 Constitution. This was limited to judiciary preview power. The 1978 Constitution 2 continued with judiciary preview power. However, it should be noted that the 1972 Constitution weakened the Constitutional Court, which was an institute specifically established to handle cases of judiciary preview. The 78 Constitution, however, removed this institution and handed over to the judicial preview power of the Supreme Court. Article 120 provided that the Supreme Court has the sole and exclusive jurisdiction to determine the constitutional inconsistency of any bill. This means the Supreme Court has the power to examine any bill presented to the Parliament by the Cabinet in terms of whether the bill repeals the Constitution, whether the bill amends the Constitution, whether the bill is consistent with the Constitution. In addition to reversing bills, the judicial review power also includes an advisory role for the Supreme Court. This means that Supreme Court may advise the Cabinet and the Parliament regarding lawmaking in accordance with the Constitution. In general, lawmaking process, the Cabinet makes decisions and the decision is drafted as the bill. Following that bill is sent to the Parliament for approval. Firstly, the judiciary has an opportunity to get involved in lawmaking process by advising the Cabinet. Once the drafted bill is handed over to the Speaker of Parliament, the Speaker should include the bill in the agenda of the Parliament for a debate and a vote. However, at least 14 days prior to the inclusion of the agenda, the relevant bill should be published in the Government Gazette. During the 14 days period, President, any citizen of a country has the opportunity to observe the draft of bill and file a petition to the Supreme Court to challenge the constitutional consistency of the bill. Once such a petition is filed in the Supreme Court, the Parliament cannot take any further actions. The Supreme Court should deliver the verdict within 3 weeks. The verdict should include the reasoning behind their verdict, as well as the following key points. Whether the bill or the provision of the bill are consistent with the Constitution. If there are any inconsistencies in which the provision are in question. If the bill should be drafted as a constitutional amendment, whether the bill should be passed by a simple majority, whether the bill requires a 2/3 majority or a referendum or both. Therefore, the bill should be passed according to the verdict of the Supreme Court. It should be noted that this power includes interpretation as well as hence a conclusion regarding constitutional provision should be cleared by the Supreme Court.
Right, excellent. Any questions from that part? Anything at all? Right, so take 1 minute and make a quick short note of this. I believe all of you all have the PDF of the note. Right, 1 minute. We have 5 other tasks to discuss. This one is an important one, so make a short note quickly. 1 minute. Right, okay, so let's move on to the second one. Jurisdiction for the protection of fundamental rights, examining fundamental rights petitions. Now, again, to take you guys down the memory lane, you guys know the 47 Constitution, 1947 Constitution did not have fundamental rights. That was a weakness, right? So, in 1972 only, they finally brought fundamental rights into the Constitution as a chapter, right? But the problem was this fundamental rights chapter lacked a proper what do you call it? A protection mechanism. Okay. It lacked a proper protection mechanism. That was an issue. It means that the there was nothing to do in case if the rights were violated. I believe you guys remember that. So much so that people end up calling this constitutional decoration, right? Constitutional decoration. Okay. So because of this being called a constitutional decoration, this was heavily criticized. Okay, this was criticized. So following that, in the 78 constitution, they took certain steps, J.R. Jayawardena took certain steps to make sure that these fundamental rights would actually have a proper protection mechanism, because without that it's useless, right? Okay, now speaking of this protection mechanism, the main thing the 78 constitution did was allowing the Supreme Court, the highest courthouse of the country, to protect fundamental rights. Okay, so what did the previous constitution lack? What did the previous constitution lack? A protection mechanism. That means there was nothing to do if your fundamental rights were violated. Okay. So the 78 constitution said, okay, you know what? First of all, you have your fundamental rights. What to do if your rights are violated? Then what to do? Then they said that if your rights are violated, you may go to Supreme Court. You may file a petition to the Supreme Court, right? You may go to the Supreme Court and say that my rights were violated. Can you give me some relief? So the Supreme Court may go through that. Supreme Court may check whether your rights are actually violated, and they will do. Supreme Court will grant you whatever the reliefs that they can grant. Okay. Now, anyways, we have a separate lesson entirely for fundamental rights. In that, we'll look into it in detail how this process works. Right now, what you need to have an idea about is that the fundamental rights protection is mainly given to the Supreme Court. Then the third one is consultative jurisdiction. What does that mean? Now, given that Supreme Court is the highest courthouse in the system, okay, if any of the lower courthouses have a problem, if any of the lower courthouses are a little confused or like doubtful about a certain case, they may ask the upper courthouses for a consultation. Can you give us an advice what to do in this matter? That's one. Also, if you receive a judgment from one of the lower courthouses which you are not satisfied with, let's say you are not guilty of something, but the magistrate court decides that you are guilty, or the high court decides you are guilty. In that case, you can go to a higher courthouse seeking justice, right? Which means that you can go all the way up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court is the highest level that you can go up to. And after Supreme Court, there is no other place that can, what do you call that? Another courthouse that can reverse whatever the Supreme Court said, right? Whatever Supreme Court says is final, that you can't go beyond that. Okay, you can't go beyond that. That is like there's the highest courthouse. That's one. And however, you should note that although any other Supreme Court can't really reverse what the Supreme Court says, the president has the power to grant presidential pardon. One may ask, like, okay, the Supreme Court says someone is guilty. That means there is no other courthouse that can say, the person is not guilty. Yes, true. But the president can take that person out, right? Because recently we saw this member of the parliament, former member of the parliament, Duminda Silva, right? Him being guilty of murder, and the Supreme Court also confirming that decision, and president recently granted him pardon, and now he's out. Okay, so that doesn't necessarily mean that he's not guilty anymore. It's not that the decision of the Supreme Court is reversed. It's just that Supreme Court decided he's guilty, he still is guilty, but he's been given pardon. He's forgiven. He's forgiven for the crime he has committed. And the president or any other head of the state, like that is a privilege the head of the state has. They can pardon someone who's been given a guilty verdict by the courts. Okay, that should be notified. That at times the Supreme Court has the power. Sorry, at times the president has the power to grant pardon to someone who's given a guilty verdict by the Supreme Court. That doesn't necessarily mean reversing the decision. Okay, decision is the same. It's just the person is forgiven. That's all. All right. So that's the third one. Okay, so let's just read these two and then we'll move on to the next one. Can we get someone else to read? Ishma, would you like to read 2 and 3?
Okay, sir. Jurisdiction for the protection of fundamental rights, examining fundamental right petitions. The first Republican Constitution in 1972 introduced fundamental rights to Sri Lanka for the first time, although this fundamental rights chapter lacked a proper protection method, hence it was criticized for being a mere constitution decoration. However, under the 1978 Constitution, a fundamental rights chapter was added with a proper legal framework. Therefore, the task of protecting the fundamental rights, the task of fundamental rights is given to the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka. The fundamental rights which are provided in Chapter 3 and language rights which are provided in Chapter 4 of the Constitution are legally protected by the Supreme Court. Article 126(1) provides that the Supreme Court shall have the sole and exclusive jurisdiction over fundamental rights petitions. Consultative jurisdiction, providing consultation and advising lower court houses. As provided by Article 127, the Supreme Court has the final jurisdiction to act as the final appellate court of Sri Lanka. This means that the Supreme Court acts as the highest courthouse for appeals in both civil and criminal matters. No other court or authority is available to appeal against the judgment of the Supreme Court. However, it should be noted that the President has the power to grant presidential pardon to a guilty party decided by the Supreme Court.
Right. Okay. Take a minute and make a quick short note of that as well. Right. What else are the tasks of the Supreme Court now? There's one more goal, jurisdiction in election petitions. Now, what is an election petition? You have an election, right? Imagine the election was rigged, corrupted. People put like votes like illegally and all those things. So what you can do is you can go to Supreme Courts and file a petition saying this, the election we just had was corrupted. Okay. So that is something that is done by the Supreme Court, determining the legitimacy and the credibility of an election. Okay, Supreme Court has the power to do that. Okay, so if the Supreme Court decides a certain election is not credible, the election result is invalid. So you have to have another election after that. So keep in mind that when it comes to presidential elections in Sri Lanka, you guys know that it's a mixed system we have, presidential and cabinet mixed system we have in Sri Lanka. So we have presidential elections and parliament elections both. So when it comes to the presidential elections, those election petitions on presidential elections is done by the Supreme Court directly, right? Parliamentary election petitions go to the appeal court first, court of appeal first. But if the decision is something that you don't like, you can appeal to the Supreme Court. Now don't be confused, just follow this here, okay? Imagine you are a political party, okay? Imagine you are a political party and you run in a presidential election and you are not very happy about the election, you feel like it was rigged. So since it is a presidential election, you go directly to Supreme Court and file a petition saying this presidential election was corrupted. If it is a parliamentary election that your political party faced, if you want to challenge a parliamentary election, you go to Court of Appeal first. because Court of Appeal is the courthouse that handles parliamentary election petitions according to the Constitution, right? So let's say the parliamentary election petition you filed to Court of Appeal gave a verdict that is not favorable to you unfairly, then you can put an appeal against that decision. You can put an appeal to Supreme Court against the decision you got from Court of Appeal, right? Hope that is clear, right? Right. So this is the consultative jurisdiction. We discussed this before. This was like, I think this was pasted to that portion before by accident. So this is the consultative jurisdiction, which means like advising the courthouses. We discussed this before. When it comes to lower courthouses, they have the option of requesting the Supreme Court for some advices, some consultations. So number one, lower courthouses can ask the Supreme Court if they are unclear with something. Other than that, the president also may ask. You guys remember we did the policy formation lesson, right? Unit 11, we saw that the real executive, the political executive, when they are making decisions in terms of policies, sometimes they want to clarify whether this is with the Constitution, because you don't want to put the law and then have the Supreme Court getting involved in judicial preview power. Now imagine if I am the president, I want to put a certain law. I don't want to put this law to the parliament and then while we are working on it, the judiciary coming and saying, hey, we are using judicial preview power and taking this law out because it is against the Constitution. That's going to waste my effort. I put a lot of effort to draft this law, and we spend money on that, right? Then the judiciary coming and stopping that. So in order to avoid that, what can we do? As a president, I can ask before putting that to the parliament. I'll be like, here, Chief Justice, I wrote this law, I drafted this law, check this and tell me if this is okay with the Constitution. So if they say okay, then I can go ahead with that. Then judicial preview power is not necessary. Okay, so that consultation is also provided by the Supreme Court. Okay. Then other than that is another one is interpreting the Constitution. Like if it is not clear to you something that is something that's there in the Constitution, right? Like let's say it is unclear what this particular part of the Constitution means. So you go and you ask the judiciary, or you ask the Supreme Court what this means. You remember in 2018, there was a whole issue where Maithripala appointed Mahinda Rajapaksa as the next prime minister, while Ranil was claiming he is still the prime minister, and there was a big deal. Then Maithripala said he's dissolving the parliament and going for an election, right? And then the Supreme Court said, no, you can't dissolve the parliament. So that was a big problem because in terms of the Constitution, it was not very clear what the Constitution meant, right? Because Maithripala came and changed the Constitution into saying, you can't dissolve the parliament until it completes 4.5 years. Then he himself dissolved the parliament before it completed 4.5 years, right? Saying that, I came to power before this amendment came, and because of that, this doesn't apply, whatever. So the Supreme Court had to clarify what this particular part means. So that is consultative jurisdiction, clarifying, advising, and providing consultation in terms of law, right? Now, you guys know that sometimes you will ask a lawyer what this particular thing means, taking legal advice from a lawyer. So as a country, as a government, they take that consultation from the Supreme Court. Okay. Then other than that, privileges of the parliament, there's something called parliament privileges. If you are a member of the parliament, you get certain privileges. Okay. So if a certain person has violated these privileges, that member of the parliament can go to the Supreme Court and say, my parliament privileges were violated by this particular person. Those things will also be handled by the Supreme Court. Okay. All right. We'll get someone else. Afra, are you here? Would you like to read? Does your mic work? Yes, please read 4, 5, and 6. Is your mic working all right? I can see you unmuted. I can't hear you reading them. Yeah, seems like you have trouble with your mic. Right, someone else? Rifki?
Yes, sir. Jurisdiction in election petition, examining the legitimacy of elections. In terms of election petitions which challenge the legitimacy and the credibility of an election, the Supreme Court has the jurisdiction power. In cases when the Supreme Court decides the relevant election to be not credible, the result of the election is considered to be invalid. This includes two tasks: examining the election petitions on presidential elections with a bench of 5 judges, including the Chief Justice; examining appeals on petitions on parliamentary elections. The Court of Appeal is in charge of examining petitions on parliamentary elections, and it is possible to appeal against the decision given by the Court of Appeal. Consultative jurisdiction, providing consultation and advising lower court houses. As provided by Article 129(1), the Supreme Court has the power to act as a legal consultant for the government. This mainly refers to the President consulting the Supreme Court for legal advice. Before formulating policies, the President has the choice to clarify the legal validity of his decision. This is an ideal way to prevent instances of judicial preview in the future. Also, it should be noted that the lower court houses also can request for legal consultation from the Supreme Court. Privileges of Parliament. As provided by the Article 131, the Supreme Court has the power to examine cases related to the breaches of privileges of Parliament. If the actions of a certain person have violated the privileges of the Parliament, the Supreme Court has the power to examine such cases. These petitions should be filed at Supreme Court by the Attorney General.
Right. Okay. Again, take a minute and make a short note. Right. Now that we have studied what the judiciary was like, and also what the judiciary was like, as well as the Supreme Court, the tasks of the Supreme Court and all that, now we need to move on to the independence of judiciary, right? Now, speaking of independence of judiciary, just like any other topic in this unit, right? The 78 Constitution is good in terms of independence of judiciary. They've taken some reasonably good steps to assure independence of judiciary. But then again, just like everything else we discussed thus far, because of the unreasonable powers of the president, it sort of has been compromised, right? Whatever the good decisions that are made to assure independence of judiciary, all those good steps have become quite useless simply because the president has too much power. Okay. So speaking of that, first let's see what sort of steps that are taken in this constitution to assure independence of judiciary. First, we'll check that. Then we'll see how it has been compromised and under what basis that it is sort of like it is a little compromised. Okay. Share the screen. Right. So first of all, the first decision that is made, first step that is taken, the appointment method of the judges, right? Appointment method, of course, you need to keep in mind that when it comes to the appointments, in countries like USA, they follow elections, right? Public vote. They get judges to be elected from votes. Okay, now this is not that good because once you get the votes from people, you are sort of like bound to serve the people. You are scared to be unpopular among the people. It's very difficult to make decisions on controversial matters, right? You can't lose popularity. So because of that, appointing judges through votes is not very wise. So here we don't have that system going on. So we appoint judges without elections. The executive appoints the judges. But the problem again here is given the fact that the president single-handedly appoints these judges to these positions. President appoints these judges based on his own sole discretion. That is sort of the issue here, right? So, however, after the 17th and 19th amendments, the president's appointments of judges were supposed to be done by the recommendations of the Constitutional Council. That is something. Okay. Secondly, the safety of the tenure of the judges. Now, when it comes to certain judges, they've been given a proper tenure until the age of 65 that you can serve, right? The retirement age is a little, normally it's 55, right? For other jobs, it's 55. But it is given, it's put up to 65, you've given 10 extra years to work. So that should give you some assurance. Following that, you are also given an opportunity to make strong and stern decisions, given that your tenure is protected, right? Removing judges is done through an impeachment. President can't remove the judges on his or her own discretion, right? So you need the impeachment to be done by the legislature of the country. So because of that, it's somewhat protected, their tenure, okay? Preventing the influence of the executive, that is also, that needs to be something that should be done by done in a country, making sure the executive has limited influence. But so much for that in Sri Lanka, that doesn't happen because the executive directly appoints the judges. Okay. Then the accountability of the judiciary, of course, checking what sort of an accountability, like whether they are responsible with whatever the decisions they make and all that. That is also quite important. Okay, so when it comes to the independence of judiciary, there are three parties that should do their role, right? First of all, government and the politicians have a role to play. Then the judiciary and the judges have a role to play, and the public and the citizens have a role to play. Okay, so we'll find out about that. We'll read this part and we'll learn about that. This is pretty much very simple compared to other areas of the lesson, right? Let's read and find out. Should we get Tasha, can you read, please?
Yes, sir. Independence of judicial theory and practice. Independence of judiciary can be considered as one of the key elements of modern democracy. This basically refers to the judiciary of government being free from the influence of any other authority. If the executive or the legislature has the capacity to get involved in the judiciary, the process of justice of the country could be compromised, which would endanger the rights of the citizens. Therefore, it is important to assure the independence of the judiciary of the country in order to gain the public trust for the judicial process. The independence of the judiciary of the country depends on following elements: appointment methods of the judges. There are various available methods to appoint judges to the judiciary. In certain countries and some states in the USA follow the method of electing judges with public vote. However, this method will not consider ideal, as elected judges are heavily controlled by the voters, and such judges often hesitate to make stern decisions on controversial matters due to the fear of losing. So losing popularity. Certain other countries follow the method of the executive appointing the judges. However, this too is not considered as ideal, since the judges are subjected to the influence of the executive. Therefore, it is considered that appointing judges by independent commissions to be the most ideal way. 2, safety of the tenure of the judges. For a judge to make stern and strong decisions, it is important to assure the tenure of the judge is protected. It is important to prevent any possibilities to remove the judges arbitrarily. If Judges can be removed from their positions arbitrarily due to the fear of losing their positions. Judges may compromise the quality of judgments. In general, removal of judges should be done through a proper impeachment process. This means that an impeachment should be drafted on specific accusations and the impeachment should be passed in the legislature of the country. Also, it is important to assure that the judges should receive an adequate salary to assure a respectable life. This salary should be stable and should not be subjected to reduction. Preventing the influence of the executive. Out of the houses in the government, the executive has more power and tends to get dominating over other governmental wings. Therefore, it is important to assure that the executive is completely prevented by influencing the judiciary. Accountability of the judiciary in terms of developing the independence of judiciary in addition to assuring external elements. The judiciary itself has a duty to maintain accountability and the reputation of themselves as an institute. It includes the efficiency of the court procedure, the fairness of the judgments, the characters of the judges, the ability to appeal against the judgment to a higher courthouse. Therefore, it can be seen that assuring independence of judiciary is basically a responsibility of three parties: the government and the politicians, the judiciary and the judges, the public and the citizens.
Right, is that part clear to you all? Any questions? No, right? All cool. Okay. Now, let's see what is the role of each of these. What does the government have to do to protect the independence of judiciary? What does the judiciary itself and the judges have to do, and what the public has to do? Okay, this is also very, very practical. We can read and find out. Now, so Tasha, please continue.
It should be noted that the constitution of a democratic country features the necessity to protect the independence of the judiciary. However, in order to protect the independence of the judiciary, constitutional means alone are not enough, as they require many practical elements as well. When we examine the history of independence of judiciary in Sri Lanka, it is important to notice that the Salisbury Constitution of 1947 had taken reasonable steps to assure the independence of judiciary. During this time, the administration of the judiciary was handled by an independent judicial service commission. Under the Salisbury Constitution, attempting to influence the judiciary was considered as a punishable offense. However, under the 1972 First Republican Constitution, the independence of the judiciary was heavily compromised as the National State Assembly became a power centralized institute which overpowered the judiciary. During this time, the administration of the judiciary as well as established judicial institutes were handled by the National State Assembly. The 72 Constitution did introduce the Judicial Service Advisory Board and the Judicial Service Disciplinary Board. However, these houses lacked any independence as they were subjected to the control of the Board of Ministers. Under the 1978 Constitution, the Solitary Public Service Commission was re-established, although it did not recreate the level of independence which existed under the 47 Constitution. The dominance of the Board of Ministers, which was established under the 72 Constitution, was continued up to a certain extent by the 78 Constitution. However, the steps taken under the 1978 Constitution to assure the independence of the judiciary are as follows: assuring the tenure of judges, following the impeachment process to remove judges, considering any influence on the judiciary as a punishable offense. The experience.
Okay, hold on, Tasha. Thank you. Right, now you can see what is the role of the each and every sphere to protect the independence of judiciary. People should respect the judiciary, judges should work in a way that the judiciary is respected, and the executive and the politicians should not get involved in the decisions of the judiciary. Okay, so it's a process. Now, taking a look at Sri Lanka as a country, right, under the 78 Constitution, what are the decisions that are taken? Now, we discussed several elements, right? We discussed several points that that would actually give independence of judiciary. Okay, so out of those that we discussed, how many of them are actually given? How many of them are actually included in the Constitution of 1978. Okay. First of all, you can see that assuring the tenure of judges, that is there in our Constitution. The retirement age is 65, right? With 65 being the retirement age, that has given some sort of like an assurance that you don't have to retire by 55. So there's enough time. The judges would feel secure about the tenure they have. Okay, that's one. Then following the impeachment process to remove judges, although the president is capable of appointing whoever, right? But the president is not given the opportunity to remove whoever whenever the president wants. Okay, because removing the president should be done by the parliament by passing an impeachment motion. Okay. Then considering any influence on the judiciary as a punishable offense. So under the Constitution of Sri Lanka, independence of the judiciary is taken very seriously. So much so that if you take a certain step, if you do something to sort of like violate independence of judiciary, right? If you do something to if you take some step to sort of like influence the judiciary in a certain decision, okay, in that case, you can be punished. You can be given a punishment by the judiciary for trying to get involved, attempting to get involved in judicial affairs. Okay, so because of that, it is a punishable offense. Now that is also another step taken to assure that the independent judiciary is protected under the Salisbury, 78 Constitution. Okay, right. So we can discuss one by one that how these certain steps have been effective. And after that, we'll take a look at how these things have been somewhat unsuccessful. Because as we saw before also, although there are so many decisions taken to assure the independence of judiciary in Sri Lanka under 78, the power of the president, the supreme power of the president, has been a problem. Right? The supreme power of the president's powers, just like any other aspect of this constitution, as we saw throughout, it is a good constitution which has a lot of good clauses, lot of good features, but the issue is the president has too much power, which pretty much ruins everything, right? So similarly, here also, this is a good constitution which features really good steps to assure independence of judiciary. But we can see that there is a problem with president being overly powerful, which has an impact on the independence of judiciary as well. Okay. And we can see some practical real life examples of the president's decisions which were controversial in terms of appointing judges. There were many instances of the president appointing certain chief justices at different points in the history. Practical examples of the independence of judiciary sort of being questionably violated under the 78 Constitution, right? There are certain instances, and we'll look into those as well. Right. Okay, from this point onwards. Sarah, can you read from this point onwards?
Under the 1978 Constitution, the Solitary Public Service Commission was re-established, although it did not recreate the level of independence which existed under the 47 Constitution. The dominance of the Board of Ministers, which was established under the 72 Constitution, was continued up to a certain extent by the 78 Constitution. However, the steps taken under the 1978 Constitution to assure the independence of the judiciary are as follows. One, assuring the tenure of judges following the impeachment process to remove judges considering any influence on the judiciary as a punishable offense. The experience in terms of independence of judiciary under the 78th Constitution has been a mixed outcome in practicality. Comparing to other Asian countries, the Sri Lankan judiciary has had positive instances as well as clear violations of independence of judiciary. The theory and the practical application of independence of judiciary in Sri Lanka under the 1978 Constitution can be examined as follows. Under the 1978 Constitution, the judiciary was reformed, and according to Article 163, the enforcement of the 1978 Constitution results in all the positions of Supreme Court judges and High Court judges being cancelled. Hence, under the new Constitution, all judges had to be reappointed. This had a heavy negative impact on the security of the tenure of the judges. The 1978 Constitution provides the Sri Lankan judiciary is consisted of upper courthouses and lower courthouses. Upper courthouses include the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal. The Supreme Court is consisted of 11 judges, including the Chief Justice, and the Court of Appeal is consisted of 12 judges, including the President of the Court of Appeal. According to the original 78th Constitution, all these judges are appointed by the President on the sole discretion. The original Constitution did not provide any checks and balances. All this power hence the President had the full authority on these appointments. In the beginning, the President used these powers to reform the judiciary. Therefore, with the President single-handedly reappointing all the judges, the independence of judiciary was threatened since the beginning of the 1978 Constitution. In terms of independence of judiciary, it is important to properly follow judicial traditions in addition to legal proceedings. According to traditions, when appointing the Chief Justice, the priority is given to a senior judge in the Supreme Court. However, this tradition was violated in several instances in the Sri Lankan judiciary. As provided by Article 163, all the judges in the Supreme Court and the High Court under the 72 Constitution did not receive validity to their positions under new Constitution except for 4 Supreme Court judges who were appointed to the new Court of Appeal. Other judges did not receive a reappointment. Therefore, this was similar to termination of judges. Considering above mentioned points, it can be seen that the President has re-established.
There's an important point to be discussed there, right? Right. So when they formed the 1978 Constitution, when they passed the 1978 Constitution, now what normally happens is when you form a new Constitution is that whoever the judges that are already in office, right? There are judges that are already in office, right? So those judges should continue under the new Constitution as well. That's how it normally works. Okay. Now you already have a constitution and there are judges who are serving in different courts under that constitution while that constitution is in action, right? So what normally happens is that when you go for a new constitution, the judges, in fact, the new judges, sorry, the same judges also continue under the new constitution as well, right? So that's how it's supposed to happen normally. Okay, but what happened under the 78 Constitution was that some of these judges did not get a reappointment. Okay, now imagine that you guys are in this class. So I'm going to say that, okay, you know what? I am going to change the Academy of Political Science into some other name, like the College of the Political Science College. I'm going to change the Academy of Political Science into the College of Political Science College from next week onwards. Okay, which means that you guys should be the students in that class as well. Okay, now imagine that some of you are not getting the appointment in the new class. Okay, that means it is similar to terminating a judge. It is similar to terminating a judge. This was the problem, right? So under the 1978 Constitution, some of the judges not receiving a new appointment was similar to terminating, like firing judges. And that was a big hit on the independence of judiciary. That was like getting rid of a bunch of judges without any issue. Okay, that was not very good on the independence of judiciary. Other than that, also, you can see even under the 78 constitution, that we can see there were instances because the judge being able to be appointed by the president despite anything, right? The president being able to appoint anyone as the chief justice, sort of having some controversial situations, resulting in controversial situations, could be seen in various times in the history, and we are about to take a look at some of those instances. Okay, the first incident came in 1988, right, where they appointed someone, Mr. Parinder Ranasinghe. Mr. Parinder Ranasinghe being appointed instead of Mr. R. Vanasundara, right? Instead of Vanasundara, they appointed Mr. Parinder Ranasinghe, right? In fact, it was Judge Vanasundara was the one who was supposed to be appointed. In fact, Judge Vanasundara was the deserved judge who was supposed to be appointed to that position. But instead of that person, the president at that time, President J.R. Jayawardena, was in power, and he appointed Parinder Ranasinghe as the Chief Justice. That was the first instance. Secondly, Chief Justice, when in 1999, the Chief Justice GPS de Silva was the Chief Justice, and he retired in 1999. And ideally, the next Chief Justice should have been Mr. Mark Fernando, right? Mark Fernando should have been, he deserved to be the next Chief Justice, but the president at that time, Chandrika Bandaranaike, appointed Sarathen Silva, Mr. Sarathen Silva, as the Chief Justice, who was the Attorney General at the time, right? He wasn't even a judge in the Supreme Court. He was the Attorney General at the time, and the Attorney General Sarathen Silva was appointed as the Chief Justice by President Chandrika Bandaranaike. And another similar incident happened, this was much recently in 2013, right? Chief Justice Shirani Bandaranaike was impeached by the government, that was Mahinda Rajapaksa's government at that time. And that removal was controversial itself, because it was quite obvious that she was impeached over a political grudge by the government, right? And this Chief Justice Shirani Bandaranaike was removed, and the name is mistyped here, Mohan Piris. Mr. Mohan Piris was appointed, who was the former Attorney General. At that time, he had even retired from the Attorney General position. He used to be the Attorney General, and at this time he was a former Attorney General at that time, and the former Attorney General Mohan Piris was appointed as the former Attorney General Mohan Piris was appointed as the Chief Justice by President Mahinda Rajapaksa in 2013, which was another instance of these controversial situations where the Chief Justice being appointed by the President on his discretion. Okay, right. This bit, should I get? Devanga, can you read from this point onwards?
Considering
Yes.
above mentioned points, it can be seen that the president has re-established the judiciary in his own discussion and the 1917 Constitution. Following this, continuously presidential actions have violated the independence of judiciary under the 1917 Constitution. Examples: in 1988, Mr. Palila Ranasinghe being appointed as the Chief Justice instead of Mr. R. Vanasundara. In 1999, following the retirement of Chief Justice GPS Silva, Attorney General Sarath Silva being appointed as the Chief Justice instead of Mark Fernando. In 2013, Chief Justice Irani Bandaranaike being removed from position by a controversial impeachment, the former Attorney General Mohan Piris being appointed as the new Chief Justice.
Yes, continue.
The security of the tenure of a judge is the important element in assuring the independence of judiciary of a country. This means that it's important to prevent the political authority from removing judges arbitrarily. In a democratic system, the removal of the judges should not be done by the small authority of the executive. For such removals, the executive requires approval of the legislature. Under the 1917 Constitution, the removal of Supreme Court and Court of Appeal judges should be done through an impeachment. The process is as follows. The age of retirement stands at 65 for a Supreme Court judge and 63 for a Court of Appeal judge. Any of these judges can be removed from their positions by the President following an impeachment passed in the Parliament. The impeachment could be drafted either on the grounds of incapability or on the grounds of corruption. The drafted impeachment should be handed over to the Speaker of the Parliament. Whether the impeachment includes a complete description of the incapability or corruption, the impeachment is referring to whether the impeachment has been signed by at least 1/3 of the members of the Parliament. Once the Speaker accepts the impeachment, it's sent to a parliamentary committee for an investigation. The relevant judge has the opportunity to appear in front of the committee in the investigation process. Within 1 month, the Parliamentary Commission should present their report to the Speaker. If the Commission has decided the relevant judge to be guilty, the Speaker should call for a vote in the Parliament. In this vote, if the impeachment is passed with an absolute majority, 113 over 225 of the Parliament, the impeachment is passed and the President should remove the relevant judge.
Yes, continue.
The above-mentioned process was practically used in 2013 to remove the Chief Justice, Irani Bandaranaike. However, this is considered as a controversial incident, and the Parliamentary Commission and the impeachment process were heavily criticized, as evidently this removal was a politicized action. The lower court houses of Sri Lanka includes the High Court, District Courts, Magistrate Courts, and other primary court houses. The administration of these court houses is handled by the Judicial Service Commission. Judicial Service Commission.
Okay, hold on. Right. So thus far, we looked at several instances of the Chief Justice being replaced very controversially, given that the President has the full authority to put whoever he wants as a Chief Justice, has given some of these ugly instances like this. So this clearly shows that we have some good good instances of, like, we have certain reasonable steps taken to assure independence of judiciary, but at the same time you can see because of the power of the President it's all spoiled, right? And we saw the removal method, how to remove a judge, right? You need to draft the impeachment, and of course, like, you need to mention the grounds, the description, why you are bringing the impeachment. At least 1/3 have to sign. We saw this first, right? So with a full with an absolute majority approval, you can pass the impeachment, and hence the judge is considered removed. Okay. Then, of course, we saw this process was used in 2013 to remove the Chief Justice Shirani Bandaranayake, and this was considered such a controversial matter. I remember in 2013, I was a first year student in the university. Second year, I was in second year. Yes, I was in second year at this time, and I remember us law students signing a petition also to stop this from happening, right? Because it was clear that this was completely politicized. It turned out to be Shirani Bandaranayake's appointment itself was a little controversial because, by this time, there was no 19th Amendment, right? The president could appoint whoever president wanted as the Chief Justice. So it turned out to be Shirani Bandaranayake was sort of favored by President Mahinda Rajapaksa. So he sort of appointed Shirani Bandaranayake expecting his government to be favored by the new Chief Justice, right? So her appointment itself was a little controversial given that she had somewhat ties to, there were news of like her having ties to Rajapaksa's government. However, once she came to power, the Rajapaksa's government brought this new retirement plan policy, which was like a daylight robbery to rob all the money of the retired people. So once someone went to the Supreme Court saying this is unconstitutional, that she gave an unbiased decision, which sort of pissed off President Rajapaksa, because he was like, I sort of put this person as Chief Justice, so, I can get decisions the way I wanted. This person would come to this position because of my friendship, and now this person is going to give decisions with all unbiasedness, and they got into bad terms. And which is why, because at that time, Mahinda Rajapaksa had a government with a 2/3 majority, and he very simply, he could pass an impeachment, and the Chief Justice was removed. So this was a very controversial matter. In fact, like even 1999, Sarath and Silva's appointment, and 1988, Parinder Ranasinghe's appointment, both were controversial as well. But I personally don't have memories of those. 1988, I wasn't born. 1999, I was in grade 3, and I don't exactly recall. But I've seen newspaper articles and all those from those times, and it shows that those were controversial as well. Okay. Right, so that's how the upper court houses work. President appoints Chief Justice and Supreme Court judges and appeal court judges as well. Court of Appeal and the President of the Court of Appeal, all those judges are appointed by the President. What about the lower court houses? High Court, District Court, Magistrate Courts. Who appoints judges to these? As a Judicial Service Commission. Judicial Service Commission appoints, promotes, transfers, take disciplinary actions, and terminates judges of these lower court houses. Okay. So this Judicial Service Commission is consisted of 3 members. So that is Chief Justice. Chief Justice is there officially, right? Chief Justice has the power officially to officially hold the chair, and 2 other Supreme Court judges are appointed by the President. Okay. So this Judicial Service Commission handles the administration of the lower court houses, and it's pretty basic from this point on. Okay. Right. So let's get someone to read this part. Nashida, what about you? Can you read?
Yes, sir. Judicial Service Commission. The Judicial Service Commission is consisted of 3 members. The Chief Justice officially holds the chair, while 2 other judges from the Supreme Court are appointed as the 2 members. The official term of a member is 3 years, and after completing that tenure, it is possible to be reappointed. The salaries of these members should be decided by the Parliament and paid from the consolidated fund of the government. This commission has the power to function with 2 members as well. It should be noted that any attempt to influence this commission is considered as a punishable offense. In practicality, the President has the power and the authority to dominate this commission as well. In fact, the Chief Justice who chairs this commission was appointed as the Chief Justice by the President. Also, the other two members were also appointed as Supreme Court judges as well as Judicial Service Commission by the President. This shows that the President has the power to control appointments, promotions, transfers, disciplinary action, terminations of the lower court houses through the Judicial Service Commission. When examining the Sri Lankan experience of independence of judiciary, following features can be observed. In order to assure independence of judiciary, it is important to maintain a distant relationship between the judges and the politicians. However, in Sri Lanka, it was possible to observe that politicians and judges having close personal relationships. At times, even the Chief Justice had close relationship with political leaders of the country. It is important to maintain the reputation and good characters of judges to assure the public respect of the judiciary. However, there were many instances in Sri Lanka where the bad behavior of judges gaining popularity. At times, the media even questioned the Chief Justice openly on corruption charges. The behavior of certain judges after retiring from the positions did have a negative impact on the judiciary of Sri Lanka. Following the retirement, certain retired judges joined active politics shortly after their retirement, which raised reasonably suspicions over their impartiality during the tenure. It is also important for the executive and members of the ruling party to restrain from criticizing or making negative comments about the judiciary in the public to protect the reputation of the judiciary. However, in 1978 Constitution, there were many instances of the executive criticizing the decisions of the judiciary even on media, especially with the regard to cases of human rights when the government in power received an unfavorable decision. Members of the ruling party and the executive openly criticized the judiciary, which posed a direct threat on the independence of the judiciary. Open public criticisms of the judiciary has always been a threat on the independence of the judiciary, as many politicians and political parties have criticized the judiciary as well as judiciary decisions. In fact, there were instances of certain politicians facing punishments for contempt of the court. As a whole, the Sri Lankan experience of independence of the judiciary is a mixed one. There were plenty of instances of political interferences, causing damage to the independence of the judiciary. Therefore, protecting the independence of judiciary became a frequently discussed topic in election campaigns as well as day-to-day life conversations of citizens. However, it should be noted that despite these flaws, the Sri Lankan judiciary has managed to protect its independence as well as reputation up to a reasonable level. Comparing to other South Asian countries in the region, the Sri Lankan judiciary has a reasonable independence and a reputation. It is also important to notice that the 17 and 19 amendments to the Constitution further introduce more healthier features to protect the independence of the judiciary.
Right. Okay. So this was like a basic summary of the Sri Lankan experience of independence of judiciary, right? So looking into this, now we saw a couple of instances. First of all, we saw the Judicial Service Commission, right? This is Judicial Service Commission, what we have now. Under 1947, we had a Judicial Service Commission. Then it was split into two, Judicial Service Advisory Board, Judicial Service Disciplinary Board, and those two were put together again to have the Judicial Service Commission here, and that is the one that is in charge of all these appointments, promotions, transfers, disciplinary actions, and terminations of lower courthouses. Lower courthouses, that means courts beside Supreme Court and Court of Appeal. Okay. Then when we look at the Sri Lankan experience of independent judiciary, these are the features that we can see, right? First of all, it is important to maintain a distance relationship between the judges and the politicians, okay? Judges and the politicians. So because when the people see that these judges and the politicians having like a close personal friendships, that affects that sort of tarnishes the reputation of the court, okay? Recently, we saw a couple of those voice recordings being released and all that. Even before that, we had instances like even there were times where the Chief Justice himself or herself being quite close to political personalities such as the President of the country, right? Which is why when someone is appointed like Sarath Pencil being appointed the Chief Justice and people criticize that, saying, okay, he is Chandrika's friend. Right, President Chandrika's friend. So it's not good for the independent judiciary of the country. You have to make sure that the politicians and the judges maintain a reasonable distance where people don't really connect the dots there. Then it is important to maintain the reputation and the good characters of the judges to assure the public respect of the judiciary. However, there were many instances in Sri Lanka where the bad behaved judges gaining popularity. Okay, so like when it comes to the personal life and all that, sometimes judges get caught in like sex scandals or sometimes like beating up their servants and those things, and even sometimes the media coming and openly questioning the Chief Justice on corruption charges, especially that instance where where Chief Justice Shirani Bandaranayke's position was challenged in an impeachment. At that time, the media stations who were like quite friendly with the Rajapaksa government, they openly questioned Chief Justice's involvements in corruption, just to make the context for that impeachment, and that is not good for the judiciary of the country. Reputation can be damaged. The behavior of certain judges after retiring from positions did have a negative impact on Sri Lanka right? Following the retirement, certain retired judges joined active politics shortly after their retirement, which raised reasonable suspicion over their impartiality during the tenure. Now, for example, again to mention Mr. Sarath Pencil, who's a former Chief Justice. He retired from his position in 2010. But right after retiring, he joined active politics. He was a supporter of Sarath Fonseca. Then he supported Mahinda Rajapaksa again. But when you see a judge joining politics straight away after retiring, it just people start questioning, wait, this person was a judge like a couple of months ago. Like did he always have like connections to this political party? So how unbiased, how impartial was this person when he was a judge? So that's also another reasonable area that would affect the independence of the judiciary. It is also important for the executive and the members of the ruling party to restrain from criticizing or making negative comments about the judiciary in the public to protect the reputation of the judiciary. However, under the 1978 Constitution, there are many instances of the executive criticizing decisions of the judiciary, even on media, especially with regard to the case of human rights. When the government in power received an unfavorable decision, members of the ruling party and the executive openly criticize the judiciary, which posed a direct threat on the independence of the judiciary. Now, when you have the ruling party, the governing side, right? The governing side, when they receive a certain judgment which doesn't go with their rules, right? When it is unfavorable to them, what happens is that it has a very bad impact, because they come on media and they criticize these judgments and the judiciary. But however, you need to keep in mind, criticizing the judiciary is an offense, right? It is an offense, it's a criminal offense, and you can get a punishment for that. We saw sometimes certain politicians even having to serve prison sentences as a result of criticizing the judiciary. Okay. Right. So as you can see, as a whole, when we take that into consideration, Sri Lanka, first things first, guys, the 78 Constitution is a good constitution. It has very good steps taken to assure independence of judiciary. But just like anything else, it is spoiled with the powers the president has. That is the problem. Okay. However, comparing to other South Asian countries, other South Asian nations, seeing how judiciaries work in, at least India is somewhat better, like Pakistan, Maldives and all those countries, Bangladesh and all that, you can see that Sri Lankan judiciary has a reasonable level of independence and a reasonable level of reputation. So, and especially given the fact that the 17th and 19th Amendment further introduce more healthier features to protect independent judiciary, like getting rid of the president's judicial immunity, assuring that the president has to go with recommendations given by the Constitutional Council and all that. Those we'll see when the 17th and 19th Amendment lessons start. Okay. Right. So make a short note. I will give you a couple of minutes.